4 years ago on this very day, the world was in the midst of a global pandemic and people were not allowed to get out, socialise and live their lives. And on that day, this game gave them an option. Hello there, welcome to saberduelgaming, where we always take the high ground, and welcome to our retro review of Animal Crossing New Horizons. Okay, so full disclosure, I've played a lot of the Animal Crossing games, and there's a fair few of them that are probably far more deserving of the term retro review than New Horizons. So why am I looking at this one in particular now? Well, it helps that today is exactly the 4-year anniversary of the game's release. But also, I couldn't have done it any time sooner because, for a long time, the game was constantly getting tweaks and updates, whereas now, for a good long while, the game has been completed in its entirety. Also, whilst I have played many of the other versions of the game, I've been playing this one for quite a while now, and it really feels that whilst it's still fresh on my mind, let's give it its review. But this is going to be different than the other retro reviews we've done before. You see, normally I'd look at how a game was received when it's first released, and then look at how it's viewed now. But between those 2 points, the game was constantly being given new updates and patches and additions to the content. So instead, I'm going to talk a little bit about what the game meant when it came out, what it felt like compared to the previous games when it first came out, and what those additional updates and patches meant to the game going forward. And then of course, we'll take a look at what the game looks like in its finished form as it is now, and maybe a little bit about what the game's legacy will be. But let's start with the basics. Assuming you've never played this game, any of its predecessors or any game like it before, and in fairness there aren't many games like it, what is Animal Crossing? Well, put simply, the Animal Crossing series is a real-life simulator, but in a far more relaxed, simplistic and adorable form than games like Sims. Your character isn't going to suddenly wet themselves or get sick just because you haven't slept enough. In each of them, your character moves to a new town or island, and from there begins to set up their first house, usually living in a tent initially. From there, your house continues to grow and expand as you pay off your mortgages, and you do that by harvesting money, by shaking down trees and getting fruit, going fishing, digging up fossils, finding things around the island that you can sell in shops, and as you do, the island itself begins to grow and thrive. Your island continues to populate itself with different characters, all based off a number of animals, and your island will have different fruits and different characters than your friends would be, so every version of the game is different to the others. There's plenty of other things you could do as well. Your island has its very own museum, and as you dig up fossils, catch fish or bugs, you can put them in that museum and populate it, trying to complete the whole collection. There's regular competitions such as bug hunts throughout the week, and of course throughout the year there are various festivals, special events and themes for you to look forward to and enjoy. Plenty of variety. So let's talk about this game's release. Obviously, the global pandemic was a disaster and a terrible situation for everyone, except maybe Nintendo and this game's release. Think about it. A brand new version of the Nintendo Switch Lite, had not long been released. It was a cheaper, easier to buy version. Everyone, almost all around the world, is being kept indoors, can't socialise, can't go and do things the way they normally would. And out comes a game in which you're absolutely driven to go out and about and explore and meet new friends and do new things. This game had a captive audience, quite literally, and that played a massive part in its success. The graphics to the game did improve, although realistically there was only so much you could do without changing the style of the game, and nobody wanted that. So it was smoother, a little bit more polished, but on the whole had roughly the same look that previous games had done. But what did it bring that was brand new? Well, a few things actually. The most predominant factor in this game seemed to be around island customization. Don't get me wrong, Animal Crossing has always been littered with customization. the way you can make your own character look, the way you can decorate your own house. But the island itself always had a very limited degree of customization. In this, for the first time ever, items that you would normally just put around your house, you could actually put in places around the island. And the range of items in this certainly adapted to fit this particular new quirk. But that wasn't everything. You could also, at a certain point in the game, once you've jumped through enough hoops, actually terraform the island. This meant you could change the actual shape of the island itself. You could dictate where rivers are going to run, where cliffs will be. Whether you want an island that's overall flat or has ravines, you could design the shape and structure of the island itself, which gave a level of customization the game had never seen before. The other big factor was that for the first time in this game, crafting was a thing. So now going down and chopping at trees for wood actually served a genuine function. Not everything was just bought. Certain items you had to find DIY recipes for, and then if you could harvest enough materials, you could craft those items. And those recipes would be different depending at different times of the year. There were specific ones for Halloween, for Christmas. There was also ones that came around later on into the game, as the game's expansion started to kick in, that allowed you to get ingredients and recipes to create foodstuffs, which your character could either display as an item on a table or could eat. But alongside all of these brand new features, there were some flaws. The flaws weren't exactly in new things, more so a lack of returning things. Parts of the game that had been taken for granted as a standard in previous games were either missing or didn't come into the game until later updates, such as the ability to swim. Also, factors that we'd seen in previous games, such as the ability to dramatically upgrade the shop Nook's Cranny. Whereas in previous games you could continue to upgrade the shop until it had multiple floors, in this game it never really gets past a relatively small corner shop. Even the museum, one of the game's most prominent features, was hot and cold. The areas we do have are beautiful and lovely to explore, that is definitely true. However, whereas in previous games past a certain point you could open up another floor that you customise yourself, that wasn't here in this one. And as for the famous coffee shop, well, no, it wasn't there. That didn't come into play until much, much later on. In fact, one of the last updates to arrive, by which point the novelty had sort of worn off for a lot of people. You could travel to other islands around and about to gather materials and sometimes meet new people, but whereas in previous games you and a friend could travel to an island and engage in games and fun activities, that wasn't really there. In fact, for multiplayer, apart from visiting the island and maybe swapping items, there wasn't really so much that you could do in this one. One particularly fun update in this, however, was the ability to go first person. This was usually to take photos, but it did allow you to have a look around your island in a way that you'd never been able to before. In the final ever update, we got Happy Home Paradise. However, that was a separate paid for expansion, so I'm not going to factor this into the review. I might look at it separately down the line. But for now, let's see how this version of Animal Crossing, on its own, did upon release, and since then. Well, you can't argue with success. I think a lot of people have to acknowledge that at least part of the success of this game comes around the fact that it is a game that actively encourages getting out and about and socialising with friends, that was released right in the middle of a pandemic that stopped people from doing just that. Lorraine Stramp, for example, of Wired, identified that this game in itself was fantastic for her mental health, as it allowed her to get out and socialise with friends without having to leave the house. But I think putting it all down to that would be massively underselling the game. This game was the best-selling game of 2020 and broke all other kinds of selling records at the same time. It was nominated for 26 recognised awards, winning 10 of them. And most importantly, its scores rated from around 85 to 95%, with the vast majority of them at around 90. The game continued to push sales over the next 2 or 3 years. However, there was a fair bit of recognition that, after a while, its popularity began to wane with those that had been playing it. In fact, reviewers from Verge and iMore noted that a year after its release, it felt that a lack of progression and a lack of real new content had made returning to the game kinda difficult to enjoy. And for hardcore Animal Crossing gamers, there was more than a little bit of recognition that the new stuff they were getting should have been in the game from the first place. But with all that said, what do I think? Well, I played this game all along, and to be fair, I never went too long without playing it, so it's hard to say looking back, because it's more like looking sideways. The reality of it is, this was a very good game, still is a very good game, but depending on how much you put into it, past a certain point when you have made the island exactly what you want it to be, you've collected all the things you want, a lot of things start to lose their luster. There's a reason that a lot of people have actually deleted and restarted their islands. Even the special events like Halloween and Christmas, well, it's the exact same thing each time. There's no new content added, so once you have everything, you've kinda got very little to play for. And yet despite that, I keep finding myself going back to it. This game has charm and appeal, and it's really comfortable to play. It's safe, it's relaxing, and there's a place for that in gaming. For me, this game is so close to perfect for what it should be, but there are two main drawbacks. One, they drip-fed us content that we should have had from the start. All the new things that they've given us are fantastic, but there's so much stuff that should have been in right from the beginning, rather than being drip-fed to us. And on top of that, the fact that there are things that we had in previous games that we never got here. Giving us the coffee shop in the middle of the museum is fine, but in the 3DS version of this game, we had our own coffee shop that we could work in. Why don't we get that here? Also, the fact that you could only upgrade Nook's Cranny to such a meagre amount is just unforgivable. However, these gripes aside, I can't deny I enjoyed playing this game so much. And in truth, despite all my gripes about things I missed from previous games, I loved playing this. It was so much fun. There are few games I've played as much as this over the last 4 years, but realistically, I think a lot of my criticism comes because of just how much I love it, both the franchise and this one game. And I think the overall scores are kind of fair. I'm probably going to go for 8.5, the lower of the ratings, but I can totally understand people who are newer to the games giving it a much higher score. Maybe I've been spoiled by some really good past games. Maybe the things that I really enjoyed in the past ones, others didn't. So for me, I think that's fair. But what do you think? Comment below, let me know, and tell me what your island fruit is. And until next time, take the high ground.